Hi, everybody. I am Cara Piazza. I am a natural dyer, fabricator, artist, teacher, educator, human who partners with different designers in the fashion industry, along with interior designers and artists to create small scale production runs for their collections, as well as prints, digital prints as well. I also run around teaching these classes, which is one of the reasons why I am here teaching you today. And I'm really excited to get to work with all of the amazing dye flowers that were grown at the Pratt Garden. Just like playing with them right now is making me really excited. I'm sorry that you can't smell them because it smells amazing. So I'll be demonstrating how to make a hot extraction bath, and then also a really fun, easy, simple technique called bundle dyeing. Sometimes it's referred to as eco printing. That was actually a term coined by the amazing natural dyer India Flint, who popularized the term in the 70s. The technique is something that's really, been around since antiquity, but India really brought it to the forefront, I would say, in the 70s and made it what it is today. So first things first, the first rules of natural dyes. Natural dyes only take to natural fibers. So natural fibers come in two different categories. We have our cellulose-based fibers and our protein-based fibers. Today, I'm going to be demonstrating on some ahimsa piece silk. So the reason why this silk is called piece silk is it's because the silkworm has lived its whole life and the cocoon isn't boiled along with the worm, which is typically how they make standard silk habitai and silk charmeuse. And then I'm also working with an organic cotton. These blanks are sourced from mywa.com, which is an amazing natural dye resource. And they have a lot of really awesome blanks if you want to experiment with doing anything, some things that are hemmed, like scarves, handkerchiefs, napkins, that kind of thing. So we're going to be doing a cotton bundle dye as well as some swatches on each one of the plant matter. So here we have dahlia. These are yellow. They're beautiful. I honestly, like, Gina, this is incredible that these grew like in this space. It's so amazing to me. And then we have beautiful purple dahlia, and there's some red ones in here too. Then of course all of the marigolds. And then here we have some hibiscus. And so the funny thing about hibiscus is you are going to get a lot of color instantly, but it's not a substantive dye stuff. So what that means is that over time, it's actually going to fade and bleed out and wash out, even if you've mordanted it. And I'll explain what mordanting is in a minute. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't play with it and experiment with it and have fun. It's also something that can be used as like a natural food coloring. So like natural dyes don't only have to be applied to fabric, right? Like you can become a food artist and create beautiful foodscapes with like hibiscus dyed cakes and frostings and things like that. So you can get experimental with hibiscus too. It just wouldn't be something that I would recommend dyeing a garment you're then going to sell to another human. So that's something to just be mindful of. So that's what we've got here. I'll go over some of the basics that you like health and safety basics you should know before you begin doing this as a natural dyer. If you are doing this at home, your dye pots are your dye pots and your kitchen pots are your kitchen pots, especially if you're going to be mordancing in them, which means pre-treating your fiber. Although we're working with technically non-toxic chemicals, like the residue can build up over time and it's not something you want to end up in your pasta. So that's number one. The metal, like I was saying, there are all the different variables that go into changing the color of a dye. Your dye pot's metal will affect the color of your dye. So that being said, when you're beginning, I would recommend working with a stainless steel pot or a ceramic pot because it's not going to affect the color. They are a little bit more expensive, but you can typically find these things on like Facebook Marketplace or Etsy or like Restaurant Depot, or even just, I think they do like restaurant auctions sometimes. So you can get things on like fire sales that way. Or, you know, your average like thrift store has them too. I use this is like a, oh my God, I spilled it. This is a salad colander. This is what I use as my steamer basket for my bundle dyeing. It rests, here, I'll just put this here so you can see. So I have my marigold sitting in there, and then I just put my steamer basket to create the steam chamber for the bundle dyes, which you'll see in a minute. Tongs are always very useful to have. These are cocktail stirring spoons. You can get these are really easy to clean down. At first, I loved only using wooden spoons because they take the dye and they become these like extremely beautiful colored objects. But the problem is then they start staining everything that you're working with and contaminating all your other dye paths. So although you have this gorgeous dyed wooden spoon, if you are trying to achieve a very pure color, it's better to work with something that you can clean down. Oh my goodness, measuring cups, stainless steel also. You can get plastic ones too, you know, those are easy to clean, all different sizes. And then I feel like a lot of people get daunted at this, but having a scale is very important. Very, very important when you're natural dyeing, especially if you're going to recreate your results again. So the way that we mordant our fiber, which means creating a chemical layer on the fabric to be able to take the dye, the word mordant. To also, if I'm getting too nerdy, please, I apologize. Like, the word mordant comes from the Latin word mordere, which means to bite. So we're basically like biting the dye onto the fabric with this chemical layer. You really need to have a scale to do it properly. Typically, you use anywhere between 5 to 10% the weight of your fiber in the mordant, meaning if we are dyeing, let's say this is 100 grams of fabric, which it's not, it's probably 20, but like if you're using 100 grams of fabric, you would use 10 grams of the mordant to mordant this. That makes sense. Yes, there we go. You're like, he was like, thumbs up. The way you mordant your fibers is different. You can use the standard, so this right here that I have, which I recommend for home dyers, is aluminum sulfate. There's someone else in the thing. It is used in pickling. You can also, it's non-toxic. It creates a completely neutral base for your natural dyes. Other mordants can involve tannin, but that tends to shift the color. So when you're beginning, you can play with the tannin, I'd say later, but just know that they do modify color differently. You can also work with something called aluminum acetate, but the powder, it makes the color a lot more vibrant, but the powder is so fine and so, for lack of a better word, fluffy. I really don't recommend using it at home unless you can wear, hold on, I'm just gonna show this to you for health and safety reasons, unless you can wear a respirator like this, don't use the acetate. So that is something to be mindful of. So although we do work with natural dyes, you know, it is an industrial process when you are getting to scale. So that's just something to be aware of. So I have pre-treated all of my fiber beforehand because you need to do it for at least an hour. I can also send you all a resource packet with instructions on how to do this, so you can experiment and do it at home yourselves or at class. But you basically dissolve your alum in the water. You never really want it to go above 140 degrees Fahrenheit. With silk, it's better to keep it at around 110. When you're working with silk, you kind of want to treat silk the way you treat your skin, right? Because we are also protein. So that's something to be mindful of. We're animals, right? So it's like if it's too hot for your hand, it might be too hot for the silk as well. Cotton can take a little bit more of a beating. and silk you would use the aluminum sulfate for. So I think you can see, oh yeah, I might have put a little bit too much water in the pot here, but I can maybe pin that. Can I pin this too so you can see both? Spotlight. Here, oh, no, cancel. Here, I'll do that one in a second. Yeah, so there's that. Now, typically, when you're working with fresh flowers, like flowers that you would get from the dye garden in the moment, like these marigolds are still pretty juicy, which is exciting. The dahlia are dried. You can do this bundle dyeing technique right away, which is awesome. So you get these really beautiful prints of the flowers, which is like kind of more like an eco print. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do that now. And I'm going to, now I am a big fan of doing things in your own creative way, but I think when you're testing out a flower, it's good to do the bundle dye technique on each flower separately. So I'm going to put out, which you can't see, so we're going to go like, okay, so you can see all of my, yes, perfect. So you lay your fabric out on the table. Some dyers will wet their fabric first, but I find that kind of messy, so I don't do that. And then you grab your dye matter and just lay it out in whatever pattern you like. Honestly, I don't think that there's a right way to do this. Oops, you don't want it to get on the other end. I don't think that there's a right way to do this version of the technique. I think you can kind of let it up to your own creativity. Some people get really meticulous and make lines and rows. I would just say that when we're just going for testing the color, you just want to get enough to cover your whole swatch sample. And I'd say around this size is enough for you to play with in terms of also modifying the color, which I'll explain in a minute. And then having one for your swatch book later. So now I'm going to take the yellow dahlia and make one. And look, I just pulled apart one flower and it's covered a whole swatch area. So you really don't need to use a lot. You can leave one on there so you know what it was. Purple dahlia make really beautiful colors too. So once you've laid those all out, you're going to roll your swatch as tightly as possible. This is why it's called bundle dyeing, because we're making a bundle. And then you're gonna grab a rubber band, or you can use string, whatever floats your fancy. You want to make sure you tie it as tightly as you can. Our marigold.
Cara, do you see any noticeable difference between using rubber bands and using twine?
The only difference is that if you do feel like dyeing, the twine also takes the dye. I would say it's a little bit easier. I've personally, just like this, I think it's a personal preference, honestly. I find it a little bit, I move a bit faster with the rubber bands than I do with the twine. But if, let's say I'm doing a very large project, something that was like a bed sheet or something like yardage, I typically would have to use twine instead, because I can't, it's harder to get to the middle of your bundle when it's like very, very, very large. So I would wrap it, and it also helps it become a lot tighter. But for things that are tiny, it's kind of, so there you go. So these are little bundles. Now I'm just gonna grab sorry, I'm in there. This is just distilled white vinegar. You really don't need to break the bank. You can just get your standard bodega type here. And this is does what we call catalyzing the dye. So this is a low acid. It's also good to have pH strips at hand. I have some here I can show you guys as well, because pH affects the color of the natural dye. So by modifying the pH of your natural dye, you can shift the color. Meaning, if you add a substance that's highly alkaline, it's going to shift the color. And if you add a substance that's highly acidic, it'll shift the color. So in natural dyes, what I use is sodium carbonate, which is this powder here, otherwise known as washing soda, or you can use, which is the alkaline substance, or you can use citric acid or lemon juice, which is the acid. Those are also really great cleaning, like non-toxic cleaning products. Apparently citric acid is the only thing that cleans my hands. It stings a lot, but like if you are someone who's like playing with natural dyes a bunch, it really does help get like tannin stain away. So we're gonna do that. And now you're gonna soak your bundles in the vinegar, and you just want to make sure it gets thoroughly wet. So it soaks into the middle. So because these are small, they don't really need to sit in there for that long. I'm going to turn my hot plate back on here. And before we put these in there, I just also wanted to demonstrate how to add your dye stuff to the water. So I've already got 100 grams of the marigold sitting in my dye. You can also, if you don't want to, great, let me just put this over here. If you don't want your, if you put your fabric in the dye pot with, let me remove this pen. If you put your fabric in the dye pot with the dye matter, it's not going to make a completely solid dye. But if you do put it in there with the dye matter, you get like a very nice, like stormy effect, if that makes sense. So if you're looking to just create a more solid dye, you can do something like this, where nylons. So these are like, this is like a cheat, a really great strainer cheat. It's basically a like toe sock, like you can get at CVS or something like that. And what you do is you weigh it out. I'm just gonna grab another bowl here. And I'll show you how to do that from the overhead. So you turn this on. Then you click tear. Nope, I clicked unit. You're gonna go back. There you go. So you always bring it back to 0. And now we want 100 grams of our marigold. I would say when you are dyeing, let's say you were dyeing a t-shirt, in marigold specifically, you'd want about 20 to 30% fresh marigolds in the t-shirt. So the t-shirts typically are around 150 grams. So you're gonna want, I would say, about 50 grams of marigold to dye your t-shirt like a nice, beautiful yellow. So because I'm putting in a lot less than 150 grams of fiber, but just for the demonstration, there'll be about 200 grams of marigolds in here, and then I'll be able to use it over and over again. The thing that's awesome here, I'll just actually demonstrate with 50 so we don't waste them. And then the thing that's also great about natural dyes is after we dye with this dye bath, you can keep using it, and we do what we call exhausting the dye bath. So the color is going to be significantly lighter each time you dye, but you can keep achieving shades basically like until you've used the whole dye bath up. So we have, you kind of can't see, but it says 49. So there we go, we're at 50. So then you take your marigold heads and you pack them You can also use a cheesecloth bag. Tea bags are great, like the ones that you fill yourself. Those are another great tool for natural dyeing. You know, you can get creative. I always like to say that whatever works for me, but if you have an ingenious idea, I love to hear it. You know, everyone who kind of has their own like hacks for making it work for them. All right, so you get your strainer, and then let's just turn, sorry for the, there we go. You can also see my crazy floor. And I'll just show you the color of the dye liquid right now. Can you see how yellow that is? That's just been sitting in there for about 45 minutes, I would say, which is incredible, right? So again, with natural dyes, the longer you let this steep, the more rich and deep the color is going to become. Another fun way to test your color, as I'll show you here with one of my silk strips, is you can, here, I'm gonna just, you enter your fabric in, and then they kind of like you're creating an ombre effect. You just slowly pull it out every 10 to 15 minutes to see how much darker it's getting and when you want to enter your goods into the bath. And that's also a really great way to make ombre too. If you are making an ombre, like ombre means dip dye for everyone who doesn't, you're all fashion students, you know, but basically if you want to have a solid effect, you would wet the fiber, not solid, I'm sorry, like meaning like if you want a smooth gradient, you should always wet your fiber first. But if you're looking for like something a bit more dramatic and fun, you can just kind of like leave it in with hard stops. But if you're going for that smooth gradation, you really need to sit there and like very slowly enter it in and out, which is fun. You can create rigs for that too, but that's a fun way to make them up. Look how, oh my God, that's gorgeous. Sorry, that's so exciting. Look how fast that was, that's crazy. Sorry, I always get excited, that's nuts. Holy moly, I didn't even put the other 50 grams in. Whoa, look at that, look at that, what? I love my job. I'm such a nerd. I'm like Miss Frizzle. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna put this out of here. Now, I'm actually just gonna put this whole thing in there so you can see what beautiful color we're getting. Then I'm gonna put this back in so we can start doing our bundle dyeing. Hang on here. Here we go. Now these are gonna get a little bit of a yellow background because the top is too much. So the steam, we can make a little shelf. We're gonna put these in here so they don't get. And now you want to always put a lid on your bundle dyeing so that, and the reason why I have those in that, I don't want to waste the dye and I also don't want to dye the bundles. So you like MacGyver it sometimes, you know what I mean? So then you definitely want to put a lid on it because you want the pieces to be thoroughly immersed in the steam. That's really important. So whether it be like, you know, if you're working on larger pieces and you need it to come up more, you can trap it with a bowl. I had someone once in a class that was a milliner, like tell me that they had this incredible contraption that milliners use to steam their hats, which is basically like a steam box that they created with like I was like, that, I need someone to build me one of those. That's nuts. Like you can get creative about how you're steaming your things, but like I've had people use dim sum baskets. Some people use steam showers. You can get like, this isn't the only way you can do this. You just basically need to make sure that your bundles are in the steam. Now you want them to be in the steam for at least a half an hour. But again, like I said before, the longer you leave it, the better the results are going to be. Now, I'm going to demonstrate doing the bundle dyeing technique now with an iron mordant first. This helps set the dye more so than doing it without. If I'm going to sell something to a client, I always use an iron mordant when I'm bundle dyeing because these pieces that I've done here, will fade over time. When you're doing it with, oh my goodness, the light's gonna go. I forgot that it's winter. Like the sun goes down in like a half an hour. Can you guys see me okay so far? Thumbs up. Okay, cool. If it starts getting bad, I'll go turn the other way on. But if you are doing this like for a client and you're planning on reselling it, I do recommend starting soaking it in an iron and vinegar mordant beforehand. You can either use ferrous sulfate, which I will show you right here. I'll pull here. Wait, let's turn up my. Go back this way. Okay, so ferrous sulfate or iron sulfate is the most reduced form of rust. Can you guys see in the camera? You see how it's kind of that greeny color? You can also make your own. Pardon me for hopping off camera again, but if you don't want to play with that, you can create your own by rusting objects. So like here, I have rusty nails. These you can create, you can make your own rust bucket, or you can just throw the rusty nails in on your bundle. So I'm going to demonstrate that now. And that also acts as an iron mordant as well. And you can steam in an iron pot. So if you have a cast iron pot, that also acts as a mordant. Aluminum pots, also a mordant, but they tend to do what we call saddening the color. So it's, if you were to put your marigold in test it, get an aluminum pot, put 100 grams of marigolds in an aluminum pot, put 100 grams of marigolds in a copper pot and 100 grams in an iron pot, and you're going to get different colors all the way down, which is incredible. I think that can be a little bit daunting for people sometimes, but it's also exciting in terms of like, having really like creating a larger swatch library. So I'm going to make a bit of like a fun lucky dip mess here where we add dahlia, marigolds, use some of the pieces I spilled before on the table. It's gonna be so pretty. This will be the this will help trap the memories of the Dye Garden 2021 in a piece of fabric. That's another thing that I love about bundle dyeing, right? Or like natural dyeing in general, is it shows you the color of place. Natural dyes have like a terroir, like wine, so plants grown in New York City as opposed to plants grown in California, the soil health of where the plants were grown, your mood from harvesting the plant that day. If it was like a full blood moon, lunar eclipse like it was last night, if you were just feeling like an angry person, like that's all going to change the color of the dye. So it's kind of this nice way to remember where you are in time by creating these pieces of fabric with your plant matter that keep you like, it's just like a little snapshot of history in place. So I'm just gonna add, if you are putting rusty nails on silk, I do recommend putting them horizontally just so that when you roll, it doesn't puncture your fabric, unless you're going for that like avant-garde derelict look, and it doesn't necessarily matter. I'm just saying this from experience. Okay, so now I'm gonna roll these up like this. How are we doing for time, Gina?
We're good. It's about 4:38, but we started a little bit late, so we'll probably go a few
little bit over 5.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna grab my rubber bands. And it's okay if some of the pieces, like some of the flowers, spill out. I'll grab my vinegar, and now I'm going to add, just want to weigh out my You really don't need a lot. A little bit of iron goes a long way. So I'm gonna tear this. I want like pretty much only 10 grams of iron here. So where are we? That's 2. 7. This is like roughly a tablespoon is about 10 grams. We'll add that to the vinegar.
Cara, when you're doing larger jobs, do you usually do a small sample like this?
Yes, always. So, pardon me, I will not touch a job unless I sampled it first.
Yeah.
Always, because like I was saying before, with all the variables that go into natural dyes, like my customers need to have a lab dip and approved beforehand, because a lot of people, you know, as a natural dyer, come to me with Pantone, and you can't match a natural dye to a Pantone. It's just not, it's not a thing. So we basically have to create a color that is still within their, you know, brief and their inspiration, and typically they like it. I think also you know, something to be mindful of is if I do the same recipe on cotton and silk, the colors are going to come out completely different. Silk is going to take the dye 10 times stronger than the cotton does. So that's something you also have to be mindful of when you're talking to clients, is that they're not going to get like this, and this happens to me and I've learned the hard way, is they see a color they love on silk, but they want it in cotton. Right. And half of my job is telling them they can't have it. Just like hard. But it's like, you know, you learn to get boundaries. I'm just like, I'm so sorry, that's just impossible. And usually they're always happy with the thing that they get anyway, because it's beautiful when it comes out. So we're gonna put our little tutti frutti thing in the dye bath over here. And I am just gonna turn my light on very quickly. And then we'll make one more large piece of cotton so you can see what that looks like too. And does anyone have any questions while I'm rolling this one up? This is a good time to ask.
I did just change the permissions, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question.
Hi, Cara. My name's Sagarika. I teach the color lab class, which is, we're doing a lot of natural dyeing. And actually, 2 of my students are here, Brendan and Bella. From my understanding, using an iron mordant on a protein fiber tends to break down the fiber on a long term. So,
yeah.
So what is your approach to using that for clients then?
So for me, what I found with silk is that you just have to use a very, very small amount, and that you don't soak it for a very long time. So my silk garments that I dye with an iron mordant literally never exceed above like 10 to 50 grams of iron, depending on how much I'm doing. And they honestly only sit in the bath for like maximum 10 minutes. I think that I've found that the fibers break down when they're exposed to the iron for a really long time. But then I also always market the silk as wash silk. So it's not going to really, I mean, after you dye it, that's just kind of what happens to it anyway, naturally, with or without the iron. So yeah, so it does change the initial, like, so like, let's say you're working with a silk charmeuse, it's not going to have that like immediate shine you get when it's like brand new. And it has kind of more of that like sweet, soft feel, which people spend a lot of money on. So I think that you're kind of just like starting the breakdown a little bit faster with that. And then just making sure that it's not submerged for a very long time, I found really helps. And then also like avoiding it I don't really use it when I'm working with like cashmere or like wool. That's when I find that it gets really stiff and bad. I really don't go near it with like the wools, but I found that like silk is can take a bit more of a beating than people tend to think. It's mainly the construction of the garment that I've found is what disintegrates with silk, because they're usually like flimsy, like magnet type situation.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
In a way, are you saying, Cara, that the trade-off for the Mordanting property is worth it for the effect on the silk?
Yeah, I think also, especially with this technique in particular, it really preserves the light fastness of the garment. Like bundle dyeing is going to fade 10 times faster if it doesn't have that iron mordant in it. Also, if you want to avoid using the ferrous sulfate, which is a lot stronger, you can work with the rusted nails, or by like wrapping it potentially around like something tin, for example, or like working with metal like tangentially can also help keep the luster of the piece that you're working on.
Thank you.
Yes, of course. Okay.
I have a question for you, Cara, while you're rolling. What is like the scale of projects that you're normally doing? Is it usually like these one-off pieces for runway, or do you ever do like multiples of things for clients? And
Yeah,
like how
absolutely.
does that go to like, because there's so much, like you were saying, variance within natural dyes and stuff.
Totally. So I do anything from creating like a print, like for runway, like what I did with Jason Wu, to dyeing, to like hand dyeing 165 pieces for Mara Hoffman. Yeah, which was nuts. But like we did it. So it's like we, you know, I like for this company Odo Body, we did 1,000 panties. You know, so it's like they're small though, so you know, like it's not as crazy, but yeah, so we kind of just like operate as a small scale dye house, right? Like 1,000 units to me is massive, but to like a normal company it's really not that much, which feels kind of crazy. But you know, the typically the max range of pieces that I would say that I do, like the average, I mean, is like between 50 and 100 pieces per order, I would say. But then we also do one-offs as well, because that's kind of how it works in this industry. Is a lot of people just want something like one piece dyed, and then obviously the price point changes if it's custom. What did I do? Oh, here you go.
Cara, I'm sure you're going to touch on it, but just in the interest of time,
Yes.
One of the favorite conversations I've had with you about natural dyeing is talking about embracing the
Yes.
pH shifts that happen when you wear something.
Yes, that is a great thing to talk about. So certain natural dyes are like some more so less than others. Marigold I actually find is not as pH susceptible as I expected it to be. Soda ash tends to make it a little bit more beautiful, like rich ochre color, but it doesn't shift as much as I expected. But certain natural dyes like logwood, for example, do. Oh wow, we have a blue situation going on here. I'm going to take these out and show you in the oven of time, and I'll actually demonstrate how pH shifts on these little swatches that we've done. So like that means your armpits, like places that their pH changes can change the color of natural dye. I would also move to say that it does also change the color of synthetic dye. Like everyone's had that black t-shirt that like just gets a bit red, or your deodorant like on your white shirt goes a little bit like yellow. So yes, it affects natural dyes, and it does also affect synthetic color too. I think we're just so used to it that like anytime something new hits them, new natural dyes are not new. but like anytime something like different that challenges like the status quo of something hits the market, everyone's gonna want to poke holes in it. So I would just say that like as budding natural dyers, like part of your job is to also educate your customer on how they need to be worn, you know? So that's something to also talk about is the wash care. Always use a pH neutral soap. Something that's like typically deemed ecological, so like 7th generation, Myers, Ecover. Lawn dress is a bit expensive, or like hand washing is totally fine. Try and avoid like using a dryer that also can break and change the color slightly. But if this is something that you are planning on reproducing, I always say do your worst to it before you present it to your client, because then you know what the final iteration of it is going to be. Meaning like wash it on hot, iron it with a hot iron, really bleed all as much color as you possibly can out of it for the first time. That way when your customer gets the thing, that's not going to happen because you've already done it, right? And that's pretty much the general rule of like how, and this is just what I found over time, is that it also helps with the wash test. So it might look different from the first beautiful color that's come out of your dye bath, but then once you kind of like put it through the ringer at least once, you kind of have a general idea of like how it's going to perform in the future. So I'm just going to open up our beautiful little bundles. And you can save the dye matter in here as well and use it again. You can exhaust the, look how pretty, can you see that in the camera? Should I bring it up a little bit further? But there's your yellow dahlia, and that was just in there for about a half an hour. If I had left it in there for longer, the color would probably be a little bit more dynamic. So if you can leave it up to like 2 hours, I would recommend doing that. Just make sure there's enough steam in your basket. And then here is our purple dahlia. So beautiful. So the steam didn't get to the middle of it, but you can see here. Can you see that? And then here's the marigold that makes this really beautiful yellow. So the dahlia and the marigold look quite similar. It's interesting. They have little like orange markings in it. So once you've done that, these are your, I would call these your, I guess I would say true colors essentially. Like this is what they look like without anything attached to them. I mean, without any modifiers, sorry. And then I'm just gonna, wow, this went crazy. Always use tongs. This got a little bit in the dye, so we're gonna open up the one with the iron modifier. I'm just gonna rinse it quickly. You can see the difference. I also like to use rubber bands because you can use them again. With the twine, it's kind of hard to always save it, but this was the piece that we did with everything attached to it. Isn't that beautiful?
Did you say that that also fell a little bit into the marigold dye?
It did, yeah. That's why I have
Oh, beautiful.
pretty green. I'm gonna try and show it to the top. And I'll go like that for the other camera.
Beautiful.
And a way to play with the modifiers, I'll just take a little bit of the soda ash here and sprinkle it on top of it, and you'll start seeing that certain colors are gonna shift. You're gonna make these crazy gonna cheat. Watch it not work now. Sometimes that happens when I'm testing something for the first time. It's always the case. Always the case. But here, I think I'm starting to see it. And then I'm gonna grab some citric acid, which is lemon, just also known as lemon salt. You can kind of see it, yeah. I'll put it up to the camera in a second. And this helps also, kind of acts as a natural bleach too. So. If I flip this over, you can kind of see these red marks coming out on that's everywhere that the alkaline soda ash was hitting. And if you look here where this top pink is coming out, that's the citric acid. So you can use both the citric acid and the soda ash as baths, or you can paint with it like a paintbrush, or you can use meaning sprinkling it and kind of just creating this cosmic effect on the fabric, or you can work with it as just a modifying bath afterwards. So here I kind of like it because it creates this wild pattern on it. Now the modifiers on it are going to continue to react with the dye until you wash them off. So if you like where it's going, rinse them with cold water, bleed all of them off, and then hang it to dry. Or if you were to leave it hanging, it's going to create this really beautiful windswept pattern on top of your dye because it's going to travel along the fabric. So you can mess with it that way too. And now I'm going to take out our beautiful, oh, didn't I?
It just happened.
There we go. How about, okay, that's good. I think someone rang me while I was. Here we go. So our marigold got some iron on it. So it made this very beautiful kind of khaki green color. Can you see that? So that's how quickly iron can modify
Wow.
the whole bath. Now, if you wanted to shift that, I'm going to just put some of that citric acid back on top here. And it should bleach out some of the iron. And you can do that same technique I just did on a solid color as well. Or if you felt like you could bundle dye on top of this later, or just leave it, or do tie dye. There's the options are kind of endless. But have fun, experiment. I'll show you what that's it for a second. So while that's sitting, does anyone have any other questions for me?
Yeah, I had a question about dyeing whole garments. Also, I'm Brendan, by the way. So do you change your dyeing process at all when you do a whole garment? Because I guess I'm a little bit concerned about especially working with garments I've made myself, subjecting them to heat and vigorous stirring and so I just wondered if you ever did anything to be a little bit more gentle with garments.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's my predominant business is dyeing garments. So you definitely have to be aware of shrinkage. So that's something that you would want to calculate in your pattern making beforehand. Also, you have to make sure that your threads are sewn with cotton. Poly's not going to take the dye. So that has happened to many a client where we say it 1,000 times, but it wasn't communicated to factory or something like that happens, or weirdly like the bobbin thread was poly but the top was cotton, so like only, you know, so that's something to be mindful of. Yeah, and then typically, so calculating shrinkage I think is the biggest concern. Stirring hand dyeing is actually probably the most gentle thing that you can do when you're natural dyeing. When I'm doing dyeing to scale, we're doing it in large paddle machines and in industrial washing machines. So that in itself can be a little bit more abrasive to garments that have drawstrings or things that tangle. So that's something always to be mindful of, is something that might twist and turn and get caught in a machine. Maybe those things should be assembled afterwards. So if you're doing the dyeing on a garment that is going to be very hardware heavy, you put the hardware on afterwards, but that's going to change the color of the dye also. So that's something to be mindful of. You know, I just had a brand come to me who wanted his sleeves embroidered on the hoodies. So we basically like worked together to figure out like when the right time was to have the embroidery, but like all the hoodies were like patchworked in this really cool way. So we just realized that he could leave one of the seams open, and then I dyed them, he got them, had them embroidered, and then his factory finished them, you know. So it's just basically figuring out like where in the process the dyeing happens. I would say typically it's not at the end. It's a couple stages before the finishing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and then never boil. Just never, ever boil. Same thing with the plant matter. You really never want that to boil either. Like it should really never go. I mean, sorry, that's not always true. There are certain, like black walnuts, for example, do get boiled, but most flower matter should always be simmered and eked out and treated quite gently. Tougher, heavier duty barks and things like that can get boiled, but it's generally you want to treat things a bit more on a simmer than being tough with them. And your garment, that goes for your garment. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you. That was actually really helpful because
oh, good. I'm glad.
I'm about to dye some garments that I've made, and I just wanted to make sure I didn't accidentally ruin them.
Of course, yeah, and you know, I think also be kind to yourself. Like mistakes happen, and like there's going to be a couple of, you know, happy accidents along the way where you're like, okay, it wasn't supposed to come out like that, but we're going to roll with it. I think that's like a big part of the natural dyeing process, is letting nature kind of do its thing. You know, it's like you're setting up the conditions, and then the thing that always makes it the most beautiful never was, you know, me. You typically. So I just want to show you this now, because as you can see, the red has come out way more, and that's just from having sat there. So that's all the soda ash on the beads too, and then the pink from the citric acid.
So cool.
Cool, right?
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, so this is like I don't know what you call this, camo cheetah dye. we can co-brand it together. And then here on this one, if I pull it up backwards, yeah, it's kind of created more of a speckly effect as well. So these are just some fun kind of introductory, I would say more experimental techniques you can play with. You know, if you are going for like a much more solid effect and like, you know, doing this in a way that, you know, there's a lot of other steps that need to happen in terms of like scouring your fabric, and this will all be in the resource packet I send you, Gina, to cover like, you know, how to pre-treat your fibers. And the thing I think with natural dyeing is, you know, this craft has been the way that we colored cloth like since antiquity. I think because we lost sight during the Industrial Revolution, like it's really only becoming more applicable to industry, like I'd say in the last like 10 years. So I think it's important to constantly like edit and research and like check your methods and like co-check with other dyers, because I think like the like the industry that's only been in the, you know, like doing this on like a fashion production scale has kind of only been happening, I would say, for the last 25, 30 years. So I think everyone's kind of editing and peer reviewing each other's methods. And there's a lot of, on my resource list, I have a lot of really awesome other dyers you should check out who have been doing this for longer than I have. And it's once you pop, the fun don't stop. So there's like a big wealth of knowledge out there, and I think it's constantly being improved upon too, which is exciting. And like Gina, like we were saying earlier before the class, like, I like to like not have like a completely purist mentality about it. Like you're not the devil if you use RIT dye, like it's okay. Like Procyon is also another option for people who might not be able to like have access to all of these types of, I think it's important to just constantly like edit and make the choices that are right for you and as much as you can for the environment. I think sometimes that like perfection is the enemy of the good. What is the saying? Did I butcher that? No.
Nope, you got it. You nailed it.
That's it. Okay. Because also natural dyes, not for nothing, are really expensive. So they're not totally like accessible to everyone unless you're growing it or you're working with food waste and you're making friends with your local florists and you're rooting in people's garbage cans, which I invite you all to do. So it's like you can find little hacks of like how to get your dye material also.
You do quite a bit of like regeneration of older garments, I've noticed. Can you talk about that? Like you've done some community outreach events and made it accessible for people. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I feel like, having have done this for a while, like I started realizing that like, it's not realizing it, just it's obvious fact. It's quite cost prohibitive to a lot of people. So that, I was running up against feeling like I was doing this thing that was inherently sustainable, but the price point isn't, right? Like naturally dyed garments tend to fall within the upper contemporary luxury category. But when we're doing it, you see how much time and labor and work, and if you're having the garments sewn in New York and everyone's getting paid fairly along the supply chain, of course the garment's going to be exorbitantly expensive, right? Like that's just, especially, that's the way that it goes. And you really have to break that down for people. But that was essentially where I started teaching, because I wanted people to feel like they could take whatever they could into their own hands to like upcycle things that they had at home. This technique, I'm sure, as you've noticed, is great for covering stains. So it's like, I think it's a great way to basically like work with both recycle, like I think food waste is a really exciting dye stuff to work with. You can do this technique with onion skins and bundle dyeing. That's a great resource, and that's something that we typically throw away. But having just the ability to take something that you would typically throw out and then give it a new life, I find very exciting. And I think like, personally, like I'm always spilling coffee on myself and like, you're a painter. It's like everything's getting dirty all the time. So like, why not have a beautiful process that hides that or just makes it look intentional, right? Like I was like, I want to be out here in the world, like not looking like a total schlub all the time. So, from a selfish standpoint, I like love doing that. But I also feel like it's important to give people an opportunity to also like make without it necessarily having a audience. I think that when you work in the creative field, especially like you're often guided into being like, how's it going to sell? Where's it going to sell? Who's going to buy it? And we lose sight of like just having the ability to play creatively is very, very important. And I think that like I've just found through teaching classes, it's also very like healing and therapeutic for everyone who takes them to be able to like work with plants in this way that also make color. So by offering these classes pretty much at a much reduced rate, I think you're opening up the world. Like I don't think that many people know that color comes from plants. I think it's not something, I think now I've been so steeped in, forgive me the pun, steeped in this world for so long that I know that, but there are still people I meet sometimes who are not in the industry who are like, I'm sorry, what do you do? And those are the people that I want to work with. And I think that just like that, shifting that perspective is really exciting. So that's kind of what guides the classes, and getting them sponsored and working with food and floral byproducts is a really easy way to do that. And then sometimes that means that you have to buy Champion t-shirts and you can't buy the $35 organic cotton thing, or you go to the thrift store and you just grab a bunch of stuff that you get from there. So it makes it a lot more accessible. Or you get it sponsored by a corporate sponsor, which also helps too sometimes. Thanks, guys.
I mean, I think one of the interesting conversations that comes up in my classes a lot is talking about like how long should something last. So I think that like the idea of a garment like losing color and evolving and then being able to be refreshed sort of speaks to the idea of like, well, how long really does it need to last? And is that a good thing, that it could last 200 years?
Absolutely. And I think that there's also like an important conversation to be had around like, you know, is that shirt you bought from Target gonna last long? No, not at all. Like,
right, like the color might outlast the actual garment, in which case
the color
it's
might,
worth it. Yeah.
Which isn't worth it. So I think that, you know, there's like a lot of like nuance to it, impermanence. And I think that there's I really have found that as long as the customer or the person who's receiving the item, whether it be a gift or a client or something, is fully aware of that and they understand the storytelling behind it, they're really excited and happy about it. You know, I think it's really, you know, but that's what I think designers are also, is they're storytellers. It's like we're creating a whole narrative. Like I tell the story often because I just find it really funny, but it's like I had a client who was the scarf company who had me dyeing scarves for them, but they didn't communicate that they were naturally dyed to their client, and the client was like, these are defunct, they're gross, like I don't want them, no, we need to return them. And then they came back to me and were like, what do we do? They hate them. And I said, well, did you tell them, did you give them the backstory? Like, do they like, did you tell them they were dyed by a baby witch in Brooklyn? Like, I don't know. Like, what was the narrative around how you sold these to them? Like, do they know that like the ingredients and whatever? And they were like, no, okay, well, like whatever. So they went back to, and the client ordered 10 more. Nothing changed. Nothing changed in the physicality of the product at all. It was exactly the same thing. It was just like, oh, they saw that. And I think that's the thing that, you know, we're all trading are like stories. And then the product is, we don't want it to be the afterthought. You want it to be something that lasts, you know, is, you know, gives you value, some sort of inherent value. But I think that like shifting how that value is assigned is like part of the job of natural dyes also. We're just warriors out here. There's a lot of work that has to get done.
Well, Cara, thank you so much. We have a couple minutes left. If anyone else has a question, now would be a great time to ask. Otherwise, we'll wrap up with you, Cara.
Yes.
And
I have a question.
Yes, of course.
You work at scale. When you are dyeing your larger, your larger lots and jobs, what kind of burners and pots are you using? Are your burners on the floor and, with bigger pots, or?
That's a great question. It's shifted a bunch over the years. So when I'm doing my like jobs at scale, I'm actually using an industrial machine. It's an industrial washing machine is what we do like all of the solid jobs in. Or if we have like a 200-pound job, I partner with an actual dye house to use a paddle dyer. And then currently in my studio, because I'm in a building that if there was natural gas, the whole thing would fall down, I work with a big double burner electric hot plate for one of my mean, I could like show you my floor right now. I can take you guys on a little tour. Hold on. We'll go. It's very funny. So like, I don't know if you can see this thing. So I have like a sorry, this is my indigo vat / computer station. And then so like that is like 120 gallon pot. But I don't always do, that's mainly for when I'm doing like large bundle dye orders and steaming. You know, during COVID, I was doing it on a hot fire outside. We had like one of the propane burners. You know, it's been a journey. This is a labor of love. Like most artisans, it's like you're working with what you can, especially in New York. It's nuts. But we use like heavy duty machinery for all the solid dyeing.
That's really good to know. I think that's really good to know that like scaling means like getting help.
Scaling means getting help, period.
Yeah.
Period. You cannot do it yourself. That is like, if I like taught like a business of natural dyes course a couple of months ago, and everyone in the class, when I told them I did it in a machine, their mouths dropped to the floor, and I was like, what did you think I was doing? But I think that's the thing that's hard for like artisans and like craft people and people who are so committed to the hand done, and which I think is incredible. I just think that there is a hybrid between the two, where there's a happy medium between, you know, sitting over a pot all day long and also having to do all of your back end on Shopify and putting something in a machine that makes it go 10 times fast. There's just no way. There's no way. there's no way for us.
And you have been very invested in bringing in interns from schools in New York City. So you've also been a teacher in your business. So
yeah,
I think it's great influence that you've had on many generations of students that I've worked with. So.
Thank you. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Wait, Gina, you've given me so many of my best.
I mean, some of them I've given you and some of them you've given me. So
yeah, they've all been incredible. Yeah. I want to have I was talking with like one of them naming a while ago, and we were like, we need to have a CMP intern party and get everyone in one room together.
Definitely. Well, Cara, this has been amazing, and you're so generous to spend some time with us today. And it's so exciting to see what happened with the yield from the dye garden. This is year 1, and we're going to take your swatches and put them in our annual book so that we can have a record of this. Amazing. And I just want to say thank you, and we'll wrap up here.